Hi friends. Okay, so listen, it is March 6th today. So we're several days into March and it will probably take me a couple days to edit and upload this video. So you're probably watching this like mid-March. But this video is a wrap up of my January and February reading. I have read 9 books so far this year. DNFed 1 book and I have a couple 5-star ratings in there. So it's been a pretty good reading year so far. I'm off to a great start and I'm really proud of my reading pace so far. I've been doing a lot of reading on my Kindle, which has been great, and I've been really enjoying that. I have already filmed this video once. It was fine, but I filmed it like later in the day a couple days ago and the lighting was like bad and all over the place because the sun was setting. My camera kept like cutting out because it was overheating and it was a whole thing. So hopefully it doesn't do that. But I'm gonna be like mostly stressed the whole time that I'm talking because I'm gonna try and finish this quickly so that my camera doesn't decide to overheat. Also, do you like the setup? I'm like sitting in my book nook for this video and I can't figure out if it looks better with the lights on. Definitely not, definitely not. Anyway, I'm gonna stop yapping and we're gonna dive right into it. So the very first book that I read this year, I don't wanna spend too much time talking about because I'm not proud that I read it, and I don't think that, like, I don't want to recommend it to anyone. It's not a wholesome book and it did not leave me better by the end of reading it. But this book is called Binding 13. I don't know, I've seen it like all over BookTube. It's a really popular first book in a series. They're all like sports romances and they take place in Ireland. The book is called Binding 13. I don't know if I said that already. Our main character, Shannon, she is like 14 going on 15 at the beginning of the book, and then the love interest Johnny, who plays for the rugby team, he's like 17 going on 18, I believe. This book just has so much language in it. I don't swear. I've never had a problem like being tempted to swear, but with like reading this book, and I read the second one as well, I found myself like thinking in cuss words, and that's like never happened to me before. So I definitely should have stopped reading a lot sooner, but it was one of those books where it was like TV, kind of like addictive, like you can't look away but you like don't want to watch. It was like very bingeable right off the bat. Like as soon as I started I was like, oh, I want to know what happens to these characters. The first book ends in like a huge cliffhanger, so it was like, oh, I need to read the second book and just figure out how this cliffhanger ends. Yeah, the second book is even worse as far as content goes. I don't recommend this book. It is not gonna feed you in any way. That's my thoughts on it. All right, the second book that I read in January was actually a reread for me, and I think I started it back in December, and so I just was finishing it up. But this was the second book in the Six of Crows series called Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. So the Six of Crows duology is a spin-off of the Shadow and Bone series. I have not read Shadow and Bone. Actually, I did read the first book, I think. You do not need to read that first series in order to understand and enjoy the Six of Crows duology. Crooked Kingdom kind of picks up where we left off in the Six of Crows book. So we have 7, or what an idiot I am, 6 characters, and it's multiple POV. They all kind of like band together to pull off a heist. That's what happens in the first book, and then the second book is like the same sort of idea, but they're already established and they're kind of like resolving some things that went wrong in the first book. Yeah, I rated it 5 stars. It was a reread for me. One really like cool reading superpower that I have is that I have a terrible memory, so I can reread books like a year later and be like completely shocked by the ending of them because I have such a bad memory. I don't remember the characters or how things resolved. It makes it really hard to review books, but I've been taking notes this year, guys, so hopefully I will be more interesting to listen to when I review books. The third book that I read, Ministry of Time. The Ministry of Time, it's been on the rise since Haley Pham did like a review of it. I've read a bunch of books that she's recommended, so I wanted to give this one a try, even though it didn't sound like super intriguing to me. And it wasn't. The kind of premise of this book is that the British government has figured out time travel, and so they are taking in refugees from the past, bringing them to present day and seeing how their body adjusts to time travel before the British government like actually starts using time travel for other purposes. So it's kind of like they're running an experiment, but these refugees, they get placed in homes with people who are supposed to like help them adjust to modern life. So our main character is one of those people who are like helping one of the refugees adjust. So she's like in her 30s, I believe, and she takes in like a soldier. The story is kind of about how she helps him to like adjust to modern life. But there's also like conflict within the organization that she works for, and that was like super weird and confusing. And then there's a ton of characters. Just that cast of characters was really confusing and hard for me to keep track of, and like the characterization of each refugee wasn't super clear, so I just had a hard time understanding what was going on. I've read better books, but it felt like one of those books where it got me thinking like maybe I'm the problem. Like maybe this book actually is good and I'm just dumb. Because it felt like when I've like read books in literature class, like The Crucible or The Scarlet Letter or Frankenstein. I'm just looking at my list of books that are up here. List of books. Literally a bookshelf. It felt like when I've read those books, I'm just like trying to read it to get done with it. And like, I know that it's like a highly acclaimed work of literature, but I just don't care about it, and I'm too dumb to understand why it is so good. It felt like one of those books, kind of. But it also, at the same time, was bad. All right, the next book that I read was the second book in the Binding 13 series. So this was Keeping 13. It was just as long. These books are so long. This one had like so little plot. There was like this thing that needed to be resolved, but it took the entire book to resolve, and it really didn't need to take 800 pages. I feel like a huge portion of the story was just our two characters trying to hook up. Really unnecessary. Is that like what 15-year-olds are doing? It's just crazy. The next book that I read in the month of January, I also don't have a physical copy of because I borrowed it from my boyfriend, is Rich Dad Poor Dad. This is a nonfiction book, and it is all about money. I enjoyed it. I feel like it gave me like a new perspective on a couple of things and just like my overall understanding of money. I don't know, it was sort of all over the place. He started it out by saying adults need to do a better job of teaching their children like how money works. And so this book was supposed to be like kind of like a guide for parents to be able to like teach their money about, or teach their kids about money. But then reading it, it felt like that whole like purpose and goal just like stopped existing, and then he was just like giving tips and tricks about money. It didn't come across in an approachable, like easy to understand way that like even kids could get. It was more relevant for somebody who's like had experience with money in that way, and kind of like giving them perspective on how to do better. But yeah, I enjoyed it, and I would recommend for anyone kind of wanting to get a better understanding about like investing and purchasing a house and taking out a mortgage and all that kind of fun money stuff. So all right, now we are into the month of February. The next book that I read was another reread for me. Doing a lot of rereads recently. The first book that I read in the month of February was East by Edith Pattou. This is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, sort of, but it's also based on a old Norwegian folk tale. It is about a young girl, I think she's like 15 or 16. She has a whole bunch of siblings, and there's this like really cool, what's it called? Superstition. Her mother is very like superstitious, and so one of the superstitions that she has is the direction that a child is born in will kind of determine their personality. The mom is like trying to have kids for like every direction on the compass, but not north, because north children are like notoriously crazy, wild, adventurous. And then like the Beauty and the Beast kind of retelling comes into play. The girl finds herself in a castle. I don't know how much I want to give away, but like the synopsis gives away even more than what I'm giving away. So I'm like trying to decide if I should just say what the synopsis says or keep it a mystery. This is a middle grade fiction novel. Overall, it's a really beautiful story. So there's like our main character, Rose, her perspective, which was by far the best and most enjoyable chapters to read. And then we had the perspectives of our male main character and the villain, as well as Rose's father has some chapters in his perspective, and Rose's brother. I think that's 5 different perspectives altogether. Their like perspectives would pop in at like really annoying moments in Rose's story. Like we'd be right at like a super climactic point, and then it would like drop off in a cliffhanger, and then we'd like be back to her brother's point of view, where he's just like back at the farm, like wondering where Rose is. The middle of the story did kind of slow down for me, and then the end of the story was like too short, and I wanted more information. So again, like the pacing was just a little bit off for me. I'm reading notes because I started taking notes in the month of February. So one other thing that I wrote down was that the ending of the book, as far as like the conflict and everything goes, was very like Disney villain-esque. It was like as soon as there was real danger to any of our main characters, it was taken care of like immediately. Kind of cheesy. That was one of those moments where it was like, yeah, this is definitely made for kids, because it felt like the end of like a Disney movie when the villain is just poof, gone, like taken care of, everything's good now. The next book that I read, I have a physical copy of because I found it at my gym's little free library back in December, and I picked it up and I read it this past month in February. I rated it 5 stars, and then I gave it to my mom and told her that she should read it. So I don't have it right now. But this book is Firefly Lane by Kristen Hanna. This is my first Kristen Hanna novel that I've read, and I want to read more of her books for sure. Her writing is beautiful. I think all of her books are historical fiction. I always like forget how much I like historical fiction until I read it, and then I'm like, I like historical fiction, I should read more, and then I forget. So Firefly Lane is the story of 2 girls, Tully and Kate. They meet when they are in junior high in the 70s. From that point on, they decide to be like best friends for the rest of their life. And so it just kind of goes through their journey of friendship, and each section of the book is separated by decades. So we have the 70s, 80s, 90s, like all the way up to present day. And it is dual POV, but like sometimes the perspectives will shift in the middle of a chapter, which I found was really interesting. And I think like as we would get later in the book, that would happen more often, which I thought was really a really interesting, cool choice, because it kind of showed like how close the girls were and how like interconnected their thoughts were. Or sometimes it would be like in Kate's perspective, but you'd be getting like a little bit of a glimpse into like Tully's mindset, just because Kate knew Tully so much and could like predict what she was feeling. And I gotta finish up talking about this because my camera's telling me that it's overheating. I liked Kate a lot more than Tully, but I did like Tully a lot. Tully was one of those like not like other girls, like super quirky, which I don't normally like, but I felt like her characterization was really well written. Like all of her like super quirky, like weird, out there kind of personality traits were always believable, and her motivations were very clear, and like I could relate or at least understand why she was doing what she was doing throughout the whole book. So I thought that was really well done, and you should definitely read this. Even if you don't like historical fiction, I think it's a beautiful novel just about friendship. I have more thoughts on the friendship aspect, but I'm gonna give my camera a break because I've been filming for 28 minutes, and apparently that's as long as my camera can last filming at one time. So I'm gonna give it a rest, and then I'll be back to talk about more thoughts on Firefly Lane. I'm back. The lighting is weird and different in this video. So where was I? I talked about it a little bit in my last vlog during like the week of Valentine's Day. I was reading this book, and I said in that vlog the friendship sort of was like hard to believe that they really were best friends for forever, because it seemed like they just sort of like decided to be best friends, and there was never like a whole lot of chemistry. Made it hard for me to understand why they were really friends. But that ended up actually being one of my favorite aspects of the book, because it really got me thinking about friendship and what a best friend is. Just 2 people who decide to be best friends. Two people who decide to put the other person first in all situations. And that's pretty much it. There's no special recipe. There's no like magic. There's no like one person out there that you're like just waiting to find to be your best friend for life. Like it really just takes two parties who want to be best friends for life, and then they commit to doing that. Yeah, I just thought that it illustrated that concept really beautifully, and the girls could have just as easily at any point in their friendship decided to not be friends, but instead they like stuck with each other through everything. It became one of my favorite things about the book, even though I started out feeling disappointed / confused about it. Anyway, this one was a 5-star read. The next book that I read, I don't know where it is because I have my own copy. Magnolia Farms by Chip and Joanna Gaines. This book is a short autobiography just about the show Fixer Upper. I don't know if it's still running. Probably not, because TV is like doesn't exist anymore. But yeah, this is just a story of kind of how that like show came to be and how they like kind of became successful in what they were doing. It's mostly written by Joanna. She writes like a bulk of the story, and then Chip will like chime in here and there, and he has like his own font. When he's speaking, you can tell because it's like in a different font. And at first I found that like super cringy. Chip would chime in and be like, oh my gosh, yeah, I remember when that happened. And it would be like, okay, Chip, like, thank you. I got used to it later on because he had some chapters where he was like telling the main story, and so it became a little bit less cringy, but at first it was just like, this is a little bit weird. But yeah, so Joanna tells like a bulk of their story, and I really enjoy her perspective on things. She's very like type A, like likes to have a plan, likes to know how things are gonna go, and Chip is like the opposite, like very aloof and like makes decisions seemingly rashly. I just really admire that she seems to adjust like surprisingly well to the things that Chip throws her way. Like he'll just literally like sell their house and then tell her like, hey, by the way, I bought this house. She's like, what the heck? And then she like figures it out and they move on with their lives. They're definitely not writers, so the writing is a little bit all over the place. Very much stream of consciousness. So they would start talking about one thing and it would remind them of another thing, and then they'd go off on like a little rabbit trail. But I feel like in the end they got their point across, but it was very much like you were on this stream of consciousness journey with them. If you're interested in like starting your own business, I feel like this kind of gives a really good Christian perspective on that whole concept. One book that I forgot to mention, the book that I DNF'd was Daughter of No Worlds by Carissa Broadbent. I don't know, it was interesting. I don't remember like hating it so much, but I think I just wasn't in the right mindset to pick it up at the time. More like a chore to read this book rather than like enjoyable. The world building wasn't like totally fleshed out. I think she's like maybe a mind reader, and there wasn't like a real clear like conflict. The romance like that was being set up wasn't really like interesting me a whole lot. So for those reasons I just decided to not continue it. I will say one cool interesting thing about this book was that the main character, she was like a non-native in whatever context that she ended up being in. The native language that everyone else in the book was speaking was like English, but they had like some other name for it. And so the character was like narrating the book in English, but then when she would like speak with other characters, it was like she was learning English. I thought that was really interesting, like getting to kind of peek into her perspective of what it was like to learn English. I don't know. I thought that was a cool detail. After the Magnolia story, the next book that I picked up, Caraval by Stephanie Garber. I have read the Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy by Stephanie Garber. Absolutely love that trilogy. This trilogy takes place before the events of Once Upon a Broken Heart, so technically you're supposed to read this trilogy first, but I didn't. And I don't really regret that. I think that the other series was like fantastic on its own, and I don't think I was like really missing anything when I read that series. Right now reading Caraval, that trilogy, I do feel like some things have been spoiled for me because I read Once Upon a Broken Heart first. Like mostly just like the love interests. I know like kind of who is gonna end up with who. You can do whatever you want. I hate when there's like book series and people like tell you a specific way to read it, and there's like spin-off series and stuff, like then it just like kind of takes out the fun of reading. It's like homework that you have to do in order to like read a book, and I don't like that. Except for Throne of Glass. There is a specific way to read the Throne of Glass series, and I will stand by that. Anyway, back to Caraval. Yeah, this is a story about two sisters, Scarlet and Donatella. The first book, Caraval, is told from Scarlet's point of view. I loved her. I loved reading from her perspective. And one thing that was really cool about her character, it was like established early on in the story that Scarlet has always seen emotions as color. The author used that device like throughout the whole book, and I thought that was really beautiful. And there's like many quotes that I highlighted that included that sort of imagery. So she's the older sister, she's very protective of her younger sister, and her dream has always been to go to Caraval, which is this like big event that happens every year, like a big game that people participate in, and they're trying to like solve mysteries and win a prize. All of the people that you meet in Caraval pretty much are actors, so things aren't really what they seem, and you kind of like find out at the end of the book like what was actually going on behind the scenes. I enjoyed this book. I rated it 3 stars just because I feel like my expectations were really high for this book because I had read Once Upon a Broken Heart and loved it so much, and this trilogy was like highly recommended. I also was expecting like the twists and turns and like mystery element of the story to be a lot more prominent, because people were like, oh my gosh, like I never would have predicted like what happened. And so I was like working really hard to solve a mystery in the book, and like anytime a character would do something or say something or like show up somewhere, I would like not believe it and be like, that's probably actually like this random person like in a mask. My distrust of everything was so high that like when something important and real did happen, I would be like, that's probably not what's actually happening. And then I would like miss out on important plot because I would just like dismiss it as like not important. And then the end of the book, like when everything was revealed, it was like, oh, because I had set my expectations so high for having like this crazy reveal at the end, I found myself a little bit disappointed. So I would just say don't go into the book expecting it to be as like crazy life-changing as everyone else has portrayed it to be. Life-changing is actually a word that one of the students at the school I work at used to describe this series. She saw me reading Once Upon a Broken Heart and was like, oh my gosh, have you read Caraval? And I was like, no, I haven't read it yet. And she's like, oh my gosh, life-changing. So that's what I was expecting. That's what I was expecting. I was expecting it to be life-changing, but it wasn't. I love Stephanie Garber's imagery. Everything she writes feels like a fairy tale. I just finished Legendary today. I'm not going to talk about it too much in this video because I'll probably do like a March wrap up or something. Legendary is a lot better than Caraval. Okay, those are all the books that I read in January and February. A lot of really good books that I read, and I feel like I did a good job of like recalling what they were about and describing them. So tell me that you're proud of me, because I'm proud of me for remembering all that. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like it and subscribe and leave a comment below what you liked about the video so that I can try and do more of that. I hope to see you guys very soon. Bye.